I went from flying the most protected aircraft on the planet, carrying the President of the United States, to being treated as a threat to national security itself. Many said I had betrayed my homeland, but for me, that was the moment I finally discovered the truth that had always slipped away from me. What I am about to tell you may sound improbable, but it was the path that forever changed my life before God. My name is Colonel David Walker. I am 50 years old, and I live in the United States. For decades, my existence was marked by military missions, strict protocols, and the belief that serving my country was the greatest form of devotion a person could offer. I believed my identity was completely defined by the uniform I wore and the oaths I had repeated since I was young. Before I continue with my story of conversion, write in the comments where you are watching from. I want to know how far this account is reaching, because I know that each experience can cross borders and touch people in places we never imagined. I grew up hearing that my destiny was written even before I learned how to write my own name. In my home, serving the flag was not just a professional choice, but almost a family commandment. Patriotism flowed through our veins as a sacred inheritance. My grandfather, a World War II hero, told stories of the Normandy landing as if describing a liturgy. My father, a Vietnam veteran, carried on his body physical scars and in his mind wounds that never truly healed. At every family gathering, conversations revolved around battles, strategies, and memories that were exalted as eternal glories. I don't recall seeing my parents discuss faith or religion. The church we attended on Sundays was more of a social ritual than a spiritual one. We sat in polished pews, sang a few hymns, but once we got home, the Bible was placed back on the shelf, and the real altar was reinstalled. Framed medals, photographs in uniform, flags carefully folded on shelves. For us, serving God was distant, but serving America was sacred. Since childhood, I absorbed the idea that my future could not be any different. At 10 years old, I already knew how to march in a straight line, imitated speeches I heard on television, and recited the Pledge of Allegiance as if it were a morning prayer. My mother smiled with pride, saying I was a little soldier. For me, that title was a crown. I felt part of a lineage of guardians who, generation after generation, carried the weight of freedom on their shoulders. When I reached my teenage years, the pressure became even more intense. While some classmates dreamed of becoming engineers, musicians, or athletes, I never even considered another path. The only horizon I saw was the Air Force. For my father, any deviation from that would be interpreted as weakness or even betrayal. "Walker, the men in our family don't run from the fight," he repeated as if sealing my destiny. Thus, the Air Force Academy became my absolute goal. Every morning was trained with military discipline even before I was old enough to enlist. Runs at dawn, studies of strategy, reading biographies of generals. I was shaping my mind and body to occupy the place that awaited me. Patriotism was not just ideology, it was identity. I remember one specific day. My father opened a wooden box and showed me the folded flag he had received at the funeral of a fellow soldier. With tears held back, he said, "Son, never forget, America lives because men of honor are willing to die for her." That etched itself deeper into me than any sermon I had ever heard from a church pulpit. Time passed, and the calling became inevitable. When I turned 18, I entered the gates of the academy in Colorado Springs for the first time. There I felt I was finally where I belonged. It was like fulfilling a silent prophecy of the Walker family. I did not know it yet, but this unshakable faith in the flag would one day be challenged by something far greater, something no military manual could ever prepare me for. Crossing the gates of the Air Force Academy was like passing through an invisible border. There, every detail of my life revolved around discipline, hierarchy, and honor. I breathed marching orders, codes of conduct, and rules that molded ordinary men into elite soldiers. While many complained about the rigor, I felt at home. It was as if every exercise confirmed that I was exactly on the path my family had always expected. The years of training were intense. I learned to master everything from small training aircraft to jets capable of breaking the sound barrier. I spent sleepless nights studying aerodynamics, combat strategies, and military logistics. With each challenge overcome, my pride grew, but along with it grew an almost blind dependence on the system. I never questioned orders. For me, to obey was synonymous with to exist. When I completed my training, I was sent on my first international missions. The Middle East became a constant backdrop in my life. Endless deserts, ancient cities reduced to ruins, silent night flights. All of this became part of my routine. Flying over hostile territories gave me the feeling of being invincible, as if the technology in my hands was an extension of America's own will. Over time, the operations became increasingly classified. I took part in missions the public would never hear about, flew with cargo that was never recorded in official reports, and executed routes that existed only on internal Pentagon maps. Each secret kept increased my prestige. I was seen as someone trustworthy, incapable of wavering. The image of the perfect soldier began to follow me like a mark. At 40 years old, came the summons that would change my trajectory. I was selected to join the team of Air Force One pilots. Among thousands of service members, only a dozen reached that position. Being chosen meant standing at the top of the pyramid. It was more than professional recognition. It was the symbol that I had become part of the most restricted core of national security. Before I continue, I want to say that during this period I learned that Allah asks us to care not only for our faith, but also for the body He entrusted to us. That is why I want to recommend something that can help, a practical guide to healthy living, including how to maintain discipline, energy, and balance. And as an additional gift, this material also brings a special guide on ruqya and spiritual protection to strengthen not only the body but also the heart. Flying the presidential plane meant carrying not only the life of the head of state in my hands, but also the trust of an entire nation. I remember the first time I wore the ceremonial uniform with the presidential unit emblem. Looking in the mirror, I felt I was touching the peak of the career I had always pursued. My superiors called me an example. My colleagues nicknamed me the pride of the Air Force. On the outside, I was the portrait of unwavering loyalty. But in the silence of the cabins, during long flights over oceans and continents, something began to weigh on me. I followed orders, fulfilled protocols, smiled at ceremonies, but within me small cracks began to appear. Every briefing about operations that cost civilian lives, every bureaucratic justification for destruction left invisible marks. I never spoke of it to anyone. After all, who would dare question when everyone saw in me the ideal model of patriotism? I kept everything to myself, never imagining that those fissures would one day become the doorway to the greatest transformation of my life. There were missions that would never make it into the history books. That night we were flying over Afghanistan on a presidential flight, classified as ultra-secret. The official destination released to the press was different, but I knew very well we were not going where they said. On board, besides the president, were generals and security advisors discussing delicate strategies. The hush of the cockpit was broken only by the steady beeps of the systems, all operating with the flawless precision that has always defined Air Force One. The clock showed just after 2 in the morning local time when everything changed. Without any warning, the panels began to flash. The GPS went dark, the radar went blind. External communications stopped completely. Even the redundancy systems, designed exactly to prevent this kind of failure, ceased to function. I knew every wire, every safety protocol on that aircraft, and I could say with conviction, this simply could not happen. It was as if an invisible force had shut everything off at once. The moment tension filled the cockpit, I noticed something even more disturbing. On the left side of the plane, a golden light of impossible proportions appeared, shining as if it were made of liquid gold. It wasn't a reflection, it wasn't another aircraft. It was a presence, a solid geometric glare filled with shapes that resembled mysterious inscriptions. As I watched, I felt as if that phenomenon was looking back at me. I called my co-pilot, Major Collins, and pointed to the side. He, confused, replied only that he saw the night sky. I asked the flight engineer to confirm but got the same answer. Nothing but stars. It was official. Only I could see that manifestation. And as if the vision weren't enough, something even more extraordinary happened. From the cockpit's internal speakers, a male voice began to echo, firm and melodious, reciting words in Arabic. I didn't understand the language, but each syllable penetrated me as if it had always been in my memory. It was a serene yet powerful sound, bringing a peace that stood in stark contrast to the gravity of the situation. I looked around, searching for a reaction from the other crew, but none of them seemed to hear the same thing. When I asked directly, they said there was no sound at all. For them, the cockpit remained plunged in silence, save for the alarms of offline systems. My mind spun. Was I going mad? Or was it a call meant for no one else but me? For 20 minutes, that luminous presence accompanied the aircraft. The voice kept reciting, as if it were a private message sent straight to my heart. I did not understand the literal meaning, but I grasped the essence. It was as if someone were telling me I needed to open my eyes to a reality greater than any I had known. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the light vanished. The speakers fell silent, and all the systems came back online as if nothing had happened. GPS, radar, communications, each instrument was restored without a fault. Officially, I logged the incident as a temporary technical glitch caused by atmospheric interference. It was the acceptable explanation within the military hierarchy. But inside me, I knew there was nothing technical about that experience. When we landed, I remained quiet. No one questioned me, perhaps because everyone was too busy with their own duties. But I could not sleep that night. I closed my eyes and saw the light again, heard that recitation again as if it were replaying from a parallel world. I was an elite pilot, trained to trust facts, not feelings. Still, I could not ignore it. Something had happened at 40,000 feet that was beyond science, beyond technology, beyond any military manual. And deep down, I knew this was only the first of many answers that would come. In the days that followed, it felt as if I had brought that experience inside me. No matter where I was, in the concrete corridors of the Pentagon, at dinners with high-ranking officers, or even flying routine routes, the recitation returned to play in my mind. It wasn't just a memory. It was as if the words were still being spoken in real time, vibrating at the back of my consciousness. At first, I tried to push the feeling away. I told myself it was exhaustion, the result of years of missions without rest, sleepless nights, and the constant pressure of carrying secrets that could not even be revealed to my own family. But it didn't help. Each time silence settled, there was the voice, clear and measured, repeating a sound that was not part of my language, but seemed carved into my soul. I began searching for answers, almost clandestinely. In the early hours, locked in my base apartment, I would boot up my computer and watch YouTube videos of Arabic recitations. I replayed the audio again and again, trying to identify if any clip matched that melody that would not leave me alone. My hands trembled when I hit play, and each time the cadence neared what I had heard on board, my heart raced. It didn't take long for the search to become an obsession. I downloaded translation apps, started reading about Arabic phonetics, and even studied differences between dialects. It was as if my spirit recognized something my mind couldn't explain. One detail struck me. The peace that recitation conveyed contrasted brutally with the reality I lived. By day, I sat in meetings where lives were reduced to numbers in reports. By night, I heard words that, even without comprehension, spoke of something pure, infinite, and compassionate. The duality began to corrode me. How could I keep wearing the uniform of a system that justified destruction in the name of freedom, while an inner voice reminded me of a God who seemed greater than all patriotic speeches? There were moments I sat before the mirror, still in uniform, and asked myself, who am I, really? The unbending soldier everyone expects, or the man being called to something he could not yet name? During this phase, I started having strange dreams. In one, I was in the cockpit, but there was no plane. Just me, suspended in the air, hearing the same recitation while an endless desert stretched below. In another, I walked alone through dark corridors, and in the distance, a door opened, letting out a golden light along with that voice. I would wake up sweating, yet strangely calm. To avoid losing my mind, I tried to rationalize. I searched for military reports on unidentified aerial phenomena. I combed through ultra-secret databases, accessed commercial aviation documents, and read accounts from veteran pilots. I discovered I wasn't the only one to have seen lights or heard unexplained sounds over the skies of the Middle East. Still, something told me what I had experienced was not merely an aerial phenomenon. There was intent behind it, as if a message had been addressed directly to me. The deeper I dove into that mystery, the further I drifted from the flawless soldier image I had cultivated for decades. Colleagues noticed I was different. One of them jokingly said, "Walker, you've been too quiet. Looks like you left your mind out in some desert." I smiled, but inside I knew it wasn't a joke. I truly had left a part of myself that night over the mountains of Afghanistan. The voice would not abandon me. If anything, it grew stronger. I could be in the middle of a banquet with crystal glasses and speeches about democracy, and suddenly everything would fade in my mind, leaving only the sound of that recitation. It was as if God were knocking on the door of my life, and I was desperately trying to keep the locks closed, not realizing they were already all open. It was in that state of internal conflict that I understood. I could not keep ignoring it. Something was happening, and it was not fleeting. The 40,000-foot experience had not ended in the Afghan sky. It had come down with me, entered my heart, and now pushed me onto a road I would never have had the courage to choose on my own. In the midst of that inner whirlwind, I still had to keep up the routine of flights, meetings, and reports as if nothing had changed. The immaculate uniform hid the chaos inside me, but not for long. A colleague began to notice. His name was Ahmed, a quiet pilot of Iraqi origin who had joined the Air Force years after me. He didn't stand out for speeches or a desire for attention. On the contrary, he was reserved, spoke little, and seemed to carry a silence no one dared break. There was something different in his gaze. While many of us displayed the arrogance of those who served the greatest power in the world, his eyes reflected a strange calm, almost serene. I remember a break between flights when we sat side by side in the base cafeteria. I hardly touched my food, lost in thought, while he ate slowly, as if each bite were part of a ritual. He watched me for a few seconds and, without beating around the bush, said, "Walker, you seem distant. It looks like you carry a weight heavier than usual." It hit me like a shot. I, accustomed to controlling everything, did not expect to be disarmed by a simple sentence. I hesitated, but there was something in his voice that gave me courage. For the first time, I decided to open a crack. I told him about what had happened on the flight over Afghanistan, the simultaneous system failure, the golden light, the voice in Arabic that no one else had heard. As I spoke, I expected to see the same expression of disbelief on his face that I had seen on the other crew members. But, to my surprise, Ahmed did not laugh or doubt. He only smiled gently and replied, "Maybe Allah is calling you." The words hung in the air. I didn't know what to say. I had spent my life believing Allah was merely a foreign way to refer to a distant God, associated with enemies, wars, and conflicts. But there, spoken by a colleague who had never offered me anything but respect, the word carried a different weight. "Calling me?" I asked, almost a whisper. Ahmed nodded, as if speaking of something obvious. Then calmly, he opened the backpack he had and took out a plain-covered book without adornment, nothing to draw attention. It was an English translation of the Quran. Holding it carefully, he placed it on the table between us and said only, "Read it with an open heart. Not as a pilot, not as a soldier. Read it as a man seeking truth." I looked at that book as if it were a dangerous object. Part of me wanted to refuse, to say it made no sense, that my life was defined by patriotism and career. But another deeper part knew this was the next inevitable step. I reached out and accepted it. In the days that followed, I took the copy to the quarters with me. I didn't dare leave it in plain sight, so I hid it among aviation manuals. When I finally opened it, I felt as if I were crossing an invisible border. The opening lines unsettled me. "In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful." Simple words, yet they seemed to carry a force capable of spanning centuries. I told Ahmed about my first impressions. He didn't try to persuade me or give a speech. He simply said, "If it's for you, the Quran will speak straight to your heart. It needs no intermediaries." That detail struck me. Unlike so many who used religion to impose authority, Ahmed seemed only to plant seeds. It was as if he was certain the truth needed no defense, only a willingness to listen. I began to watch him more closely. I noticed that at prayer times, he would step away discreetly, never making a scene. His gestures were simple but sincere. That unsettled me because in him, I saw a peace I had never found in years of medals, secret missions, and presidential flights. At that time, I still felt a strong resistance. Part of me screamed that I was betraying my roots, that I shouldn't even open that book. Yet each time I read a passage, I felt as if I were confronting something familiar, something that answered questions I had never had the courage to voice aloud. It was Ahmed who showed me that perhaps my experience had not been a delusion, but a sign. "Allah calls in different ways," he said. "Sometimes he speaks to the heart with words only the person can hear." That explanation didn't erase my doubts, but it lit a flame that could no longer be extinguished. I didn't yet know how far that road would take me. I only knew that from that encounter on, there was no going back to being the same. It took me several days to summon the courage to open the book Ahmed had placed in my hands. I hid it among reports and military folders as if it were contraband, but when I finally opened it, I felt I was not merely reading a text. I was stepping through a door that could not be closed. In the very first lines, I found something that froze me. "Guide us to the straight path." I couldn't continue reading at once. I repeated those words several times, remembering the moment on the flight when my lips had begged for exactly that same plea, even though I had never known the book. It was impossible to dismiss as mere coincidence. I continued reading with trembling hands. I expected to find distant stories or generic advice, but on each page I saw reflections of the life I was living. Texts about justice, compassion, and the responsibility not to oppress the innocent. It was as if the Quran had been written to confront directly the life I led as a military pilot, involved in decisions that often destroyed more than they protected. I remember a passage that said, "And whoever kills a person, it is as if he has killed all mankind." Reading that, I saw again the ruined cities I had flown over, the children running among the rubble after attacks I had helped carry out. For the first time, the rhetoric of mission for freedom that I had chanted all my life sounded hollow. The weight of guilt I had always tried to justify with patriotism now had a name and a spiritual judgment. But it wasn't only judgment I found. There were also promises of mercy, reminders that God is compassionate and forgives those who truly repent. That combination of rigor and tenderness struck me deeply. I, who had lived between extremes, military hardness and silent doubt, was now faced with a balance that had seemed impossible until then. Each chapter brought me a different shock. As I read about Abraham, Moses, David, and Jesus, I realized I wasn't looking at a foreign faith as I had always been told. It was the continuation of a story I partly knew, but which now revealed itself complete. It was as if loose pieces of a puzzle were finally falling into place. Nights became dedicated to that reading. I would close the curtains in my quarters, turn off the lights, and read in silence, fearing someone might find out. The contrast was brutal. During the day I sat in meetings planning new military operations. At night I read about the value of life, the importance of justice, and the need for submission to one God. It wasn't only the words that transformed me, it was the feeling that accompanied me as I read. An inexplicable peace, as if the same God who had shown me signs in the sky was now speaking directly to me through each verse. I didn't need philosophical explanations or scientific proofs. My heart knew I was standing before the truth. At one point, I closed the book and stared at my reflection in the mirror. I, the impeccable pilot, decorated part of the military elite, trembled like a child. I asked in a low voice, "Why me? Why now?" I didn't get an immediate answer, but the silence was enough to show me that I wasn't the one setting the terms of this search. The reading also stirred a dangerous unease within me. How could I keep serving a system that prided itself on destroying nations when the book I was reading condemned exactly that? How could I keep my uniform clean when inside I already felt stained? That contradiction began to suffocate me. Still, I couldn't stop. Each night drew me closer to what seemed inevitable. I knew I was walking a path with no return. The Quran was not just a book I was analyzing. It was a mirror exposing my flaws, my guilt, and at the same time offering me a path to redemption. It was then I realized the experience in the sky hadn't been a delusion. It was the herald of something greater. That sound no one else had heard now had a name, a form, and was written in the pages I held. And no matter how much I tried to resist, my heart had already made its choice. The pages I read at night revealed to me a God who valued life above all else. Yet the reports I received in the morning described operations where lives were reduced to numbers. Collateral casualties, targets eliminated, areas neutralized. The contradiction was so glaring, I began to feel an unbearable weight in my chest. How could I reconcile the message of mercy echoing within me with the orders I carried out without question? Each time I entered the cockpit of a military plane, the uniform felt tighter, not physically, but spiritually. I no longer saw myself as a hero. The sound of the engines mixed with memories of families who had lost everything. No matter how many official speeches spoke of protecting democracy, my heart no longer accepted those justifications. I even thought perhaps it was weakness on my part. Soldiers weren't supposed to falter, but it wasn't fragility. It was awareness. It was as if the verses I read had lit a lamp in the darkness, revealing what I had always chosen to ignore. The devastated cities that had once been mere dots on a radar now had faces, stories, and tears. I began to look differently at my colleagues as well. Many still spoke proudly of operations, laughed at strategies, and called destruction victory. I stayed silent, but inside I felt complicit in something I no longer wanted to uphold. A chasm formed between who I was publicly and who I was secretly becoming. The nights were even more challenging. After long flights, I would lock my door and open the Quran in secret, as if guarding a forbidden treasure. I read about compassion, about the prohibition of injustice, about the duty to protect the innocent. It was like receiving an order directly from God, but one that clashed with the orders I received from the High Command. There was one day in particular when the contradiction crushed me. During a transport mission, I flew over a region that had been bombed days earlier. From above, I saw smoke still rising, makeshift tents, children running among rubble. At that moment, I recalled the passage that said, "Whoever saves a life is as if he had saved all of humanity." A phrase that seemed to scream at me, "And you, how many lives have you helped destroy?" I began to fear myself, fear of continuing to live in that duplicity. By day, a defender of the homeland. By night, a seeker of God. Each week the conflict intensified. Part of me wanted to tear off the uniform and never look back. Another part remembered the weight of my family's history, the oath to the flag, the trust the most powerful people in the country had placed in me. It was like living in two parallel worlds. In one, I was the impeccable colonel, a symbol of discipline and patriotism. In the other, I was only a man who had discovered that true strength didn't come from weapons, but from submission to the Creator. The battle was not against external enemies. It was against the battlefield within me. I told no one, not colleagues, not family. Only Allah knew of my nights of tears and improvised prayers, asking for clarity on which path to take. I feared the consequences, but I feared even more the silence in the face of truth, and deep down I knew it would not be possible to sustain that division forever. I was in Washington, attending a meeting that brought together some of the most influential figures in the country. The Oval Office, with all its grandeur, seemed like the center of the world. The president spoke firmly, surrounded by generals and advisors, discussing strategies that, within hours, could change the fate of thousands of people in distant territories. I stood at attention, respectful, but my mind wandered. Then my eyes drifted to the windows overlooking the gardens. The morning sun lit the trees, and something began to unfold before me. The leaves, moving in organized patterns, started forming clear shapes, as if an invisible hand were guiding each gust of wind. Suddenly I realized the patterns united into an unmistakable inscription, La ilaha illallah. There was no doubt. It was written right there before me. There is no deity but Allah. I froze. I looked around to see if anyone else noticed. The president continued speaking about strategic targets. The generals pointed at maps. Advisors wrote down figures. No one seemed aware of what was forming outside. It was as if that message had been prepared solely for me. My heart raced. I tried to look away, but it was impossible to ignore. The letters remained formed, shining under the light, firm like a revelation that could not be denied. They stayed visible for long minutes, as if Allah were telling me, "Here, at the center of human power, I am still the only sovereign." Inside the room, the talk was of destruction, military operations, possible losses. Outside, the Creator showed me that no empire, no matter how great, could place itself above His will. The scene struck me with crushing force. I, who had spent my life believing in the myth of American invincibility, now saw clearly that I was facing something infinitely greater. When the wind finally returned to normal and the leaves lost their design, I felt something inside me had shattered for good. It was no longer possible to keep justifying the contradictions, nor to delay the choice that drew near. I knew that sooner or later I would need to decide whether my loyalty would remain with men or with the one who had shown me such clear signs. I left that meeting in silence, but carrying a different weight in my chest. It was no longer the guilt of the operations, nor the pride of the uniform. It was the certainty that Allah had spoken to me within the heart of American power, and it was no coincidence. It was a calling. I carried that calling in silence for weeks, until I could no longer bear it. I knew the choice had to be made, even if it cost me everything I had achieved. It was after a presidential flight that I finally surrendered. The aircraft was already on the ground. The crew had disembarked, and I found myself alone in the cockpit, surrounded by instruments that had so often symbolized power and control. But at that moment, no bright panel or advanced system could offer me the peace I was searching for. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and let the words already engraved in my heart flow from my lips. I pronounced the Shahada with a trembling voice. I bore witness that there is no deity but Allah and that Muhammad is His messenger. It was as if the weight accumulated over years had been torn from me in seconds. Tears ran down my face as I bowed as best I could within the cramped space of the cockpit. At that moment, I understood I was no longer just a pilot trained to serve a flag. I had found the truth no rank, medal, or position could ever offer. It was there, in the silence of an empty presidential aircraft, that I left behind the identity of a man shaped by empire and embraced the condition of a servant of God. Since that day, my life has taken on a new rhythm. I pray 5 times a day, study the Quran with discipline, and face each mission not as part of a military machine, but as an opportunity to be faithful to the one who rescued me. My routine has changed, my values have changed, and even the way I see the people around me has been transformed. If this narrative touched your heart, consider using Super Thanks. This contribution helps this channel bring stories like mine to more people, reaching lives that might never hear this testimony otherwise. After everything I experienced, I understood that no title, no decoration, and no earthly recognition can compare to the serenity of being at peace with the Creator. I was guided by clear signs, but I had to have the courage to listen to them and accept that my life would never be the same. I know many watching also carry doubts, fears, or a silent emptiness that no success can fill. Do not underestimate those callings. They may be the way God touches your soul. The transformation I experienced was not easy. It cost me relationships, prestige, and a position many considered untouchable. But in return, I gained something I never imagined: clarity, peace, and a true sense of purpose. If my story brought reflection, perhaps it is because you too need to stop and look beyond what the world calls victory. Sometimes the real triumph is in surrendering to what is greater than us. Do not let this message end only with you. Share this video in groups and on social media. You may be the bridge for someone else, silently and without the courage to admit it, to find in Allah the answer they have been seeking for so long. Stories of transformation do not belong only to those who live them, but to all who can be touched by them. And if you want to continue following this walk of faith, I invite you to watch the next video. Perhaps in it you will find more answers, perhaps new questions, but certainly something that can strengthen your journey.